When seeking to make significant life changes, insights from experts like Dr. Huberman can be invaluable. The first step is to identify the specific area that you want to change, aligning with your personal aspirations.
I think that I'm so grateful for those years. I wouldn't wish them on any kid, because I think having a secure, loving environment at home is so key. And, I should say about a third of the kids that I grew up with in that environment, that whole skateboarding punk rock culture, about a third have gone on to found companies or professional skateboarders. About a third just kind of drifted off, and about a third are dead or incarcerated.
Yeah. Driven by these insights, you can create a well-structured plan that incorporates the principles of specificity, measurability, achievability, relevance, and time-bound objectives.
Foundational things. Get sunlight in your eyes in the morning, especially on cloudy days, as many days of your life as you can, and make it a pleasurable thing.
Yeah.
Right? Just get up and get outside, get out on a porch, get outside, take sunglasses, just do it, right? Most days, if not every day. Try and get your sleep right. Now, younger people with different schedules, don't give up a social life, but, try and get a good amount of sleep.
Light is perhaps the most powerful stimulus for our mental, physical health and for our performance in every endeavor. We often miss this point because the effects of light are what we call slow and integrative. If you look at a particular color of light, it's not that suddenly you're going to be endowed with superpowers. If you don't view light for half a day or for a day, you're okay. But what light does is it sets the foundation of our abilities, and it does that indirectly. It does it indirectly by controlling when we are asleep and when we are alert. And it also has direct effects on the way that our nervous system functions.
And these days, because my lab studies fear and I get into this whole thing around mindsets, people always ask me, is it better to do something from a place of love or fear? It depends. And at that point, fear was the best motivator for me. And I just basically worked like crazy. And it's interesting because I didn't have a mentor or someone to bring me to that. But once I started doing that, there was one professor in particular who took note. He was like, oh, you seemed really interested in this stuff. And I was like, yeah, because he was teaching me about depression, schizophrenia, neurochemicals. I thought I was totally turned on by the world of neuroscience. It wasn't even called neuroscience back then, but this one guy, Harry Carlisle, he was teaching me about thermal regulation and how the brain works and how receptors in the skin relate to perceptions in the mind. And he also had a deep sensitivity to mental disease. And I'd seen a lot of that. I'd seen a lot of depression and anxiety in my own family. I'd had a friend commit suicide, another friend become schizophrenic. I think he's still walking the Mission District of San Francisco now. Seen some friends become addicts. And so here was someone explaining that there's actually an underlying basis for this. So a lot of people are struggling with focus. And I'll just point out that there is a fair amount of, clinically diagnosed ADHD out there. I think the current numbers are somewhere between 10 and 11% of young folks are now diagnosed with ADHD, and I think that's probably accurate. I don't know whether or not the numbers are going up with social media. There's a lot of speculation about whether or not things like ADHD and eating disorders are increasing with social media, or whether or not they've been constant and our ability to detect them is just getting better. So that's an ongoing debate, but the numbers are about 10 to 11%. First of all, a couple maybe sort of myths or pseudo-myths to eliminate. The first thing is that we are very good at splitting our attention. Humans can multitask. All old world primates have what's called covert attention. I can look at you and have a conversation with you, and I can attend to the glass that's just to the right of my right hand. So I can split my attention into two cones. I can also bring one of those cones of attention internally. So I can pay attention to maybe how fast my heart is beating right now while I'm talking to you. So it's a complete myth that we can't multitask. We absolutely can multitask. It's much harder to split our attention into 3 cones of attention or 4 cones of attention. But one thing that's very clear, it's very well grounded in neuroscience and this concept of covert attention, is that it has utility, right? Covert attention has been thought to be useful in the context of monitoring social circumstances. So the typical neuroscience lecture form of this is, that monkeys in a big troop would need to pay attention to who the dominant and subordinate males and females are and govern their behavior accordingly. In other words, pay attention to what's going around you, going on around you, not just to what you want to do and how the person or monkey in front of you is behaving. And humans do this too. The common example that's used in neuroscience lectures is a couple people a couple on a date out to dinner, and someone's attending to somebody else in the corner that might have been a better date or something, or paying attention to that conversation.
Right.
Yeah, it's totally possible. So we split. We can split. If we are in a pretty relaxed state, or if we are happy, we generally feel like we can do what we want to do. We can maneuver through our environment. We can make choices that are reasonable, but oftentimes we're not in relaxed and happy states. That's just part of the human experience, obviously. And there's a fundamental feature to the nervous system, which is this thing they call the autonomic nervous system, which is just fancy nerd speak for the components of your nervous system that raise your levels of alertness or bring them way down. Sometimes we hear fight or flight, rest and digest, but this system governs all that, but a lot more. And basically what happens is when we are at the extremes of the autonomic, what I call seesaw, of very, very alert to the point of being really stressed or panicked or concerned, or if we are very close to sleep and we're drowsy and we're exhausted. At those points along the autonomic nervous system, our thoughts become a bit like a runaway train. If you're very upset, it's hard to talk yourself out of it. If you're stressed, it's hard to think yourself out of it. In fact, you can start doing all sorts of third personing and rationalization. You can call someone, you can text somebody. It's very hard to get yourself out of those states with thinking alone. But the beauty of the autonomic nervous system is that it traverses the brain and the body, and it connects to essentially all the organs of the body. And it's a two-way street, such that certain behaviors, even certain patterns of breathing, etc., allow us to shift where we are on the autonomic continuum between very, very alert and stressed and very calm, and thereby give our mind a shift also in terms of the kinds of thoughts that we can entertain, the sorts of actions that we can engage in. To make this concrete, if you're very, very stressed, you're very, very upset, two things happen. One, it's very hard to take your focus off whatever it is that's upsetting you. And if you don't know what's upsetting you, pure anxiety, but you don't know why, it's very hard to take your mind off of the feelings of anxiety.
Very good idea, if you want to be healthy, to do 3 days a week of weight training. We're talking about 10 minutes of warm up and 50 to 60 minutes of working out. If you want, we have a schedule that encompasses all this. That's on hubermanlab.com. You get it free. There's nothing to sell here. It's just like a fitness toolkit. Then we have a sleep toolkit. All that's zero cost. Oh, wow. You just download it as a PDF, 3-pager, so you don't have to listen to me talk. Yeah. Then I would say 3 days a week of resistance training, and train your legs, guys. Come on. Come on. And yeah, and 3 days a week of some cardiovascular work. People might say, well, listen, I'm in my 20s or 30s. I'm not worried about it. It's not about being worried about a heart attack. It's about maintaining blood flow to everything.
What is some cardiovascular?
Okay, so I think 1 day a week, you take a long, slow jog or pedal on the bike or treadmill or swim, whatever your favorite thing is. If you want to make it social and you're out with somebody, you could literally get one, wear a weight vest for a hike if you want to make it harder. But you could skip rope, whatever. The other cardio day, sprint. It's real easy. Find a patch of land, sprint for 30 seconds to 45 seconds, then walk back for a minute to 90 seconds, sprint again, do that 5 to 10 times. By the end, you will have increased your speed, your VO2 max, your output. And then another day, do something fun, I got a friend, he's a musician, I won't name his name, he's a well-known musician. He's really into Pilates right now, probably for a bunch of reasons. Loves Pilates. He's like, yo, I'm loving Pilates, and then he's Pilates. Some other cardiovascular thing that's kind of fun. Could be basketball, could be skateboarding, something that you enjoy. At least 3 days a week. And the other day is weight train. It's not complicated. And then 1 day a week, just take off as a recovery day.
So I generally go to sleep somewhere between 10 and 11 p.m., although lately I've been going to sleep much earlier because I've been finishing my last meal sometime right around 6:30, 7. And that's not because I'm on some extravagant nutritional routine. I've just started getting up earlier for social reasons. my partner, she goes to bed really early. And so just for coordinating schedules, it just makes sense. But I think most people go to bed somewhere between 10 and 11 p.m. or 9 and 11 p.m. So right around 5 p.m., I'm not an evening exerciser. I like exercising in the morning or the day, especially because the way I like to exercise pretty intensely for about 45 minutes or 50 minutes. And that requires caffeine for me. And I don't want to drink caffeine too late in the day. So I stop drinking caffeine around 2 or 3 p.m. and oftentimes earlier. That's just what works for me. But a couple of things happen in the evening. First of all, my evening meals are more laden with carbohydrates than they are proteins, typically, not every day. There's times I'll have a steak for dinner or something like that, chicken soup or whatever it is. But it's very clear that fasting and low carbohydrate meals, I'm not saying diets overall, but meals, that those lend themselves to more alertness and focus. And a lot of people say, well, how can that be? The brain uses glycogen, you need carbohydrate. Well, when you eat a meal that is slightly devoid of starches, it creates a sense of alertness because there's actually a mild adrenaline response. So what I do is I'm rewinding a little bit into the earlier part of the day, but I fast until about 11 o'clock. I usually get my exercise at some point before 11 o'clock or noon. I'm not super strict about that. Then my meal is generally some meat, a salad, something low carbohydrate. If I train really hard, I might have some rice or oatmeal or something like that, and some fruit. And then in the afternoon, I have a snack, which is also pretty low carbohydrate because I want to have that alertness, and I'm drinking caffeine. So I'm kind of humming around, doing my work and trying to get into that high focus state. For dinner, I generally will eat pasta or something that includes more starches because starches are known to actually reduce cortisol levels in the body. This is why we eat comfort foods. Most comfort foods involve eating foods that are pretty carbohydrate laden because there's a pathway involving carbohydrates and the amino acid tryptophan that converts to serotonin, and it essentially blocks the cortisol response. A lot of people that are on very low carbohydrate diets, I have no problem with that if people do ketogenic diets or low carb diets, but those people often have a hard time sleeping. They have to rely on a lot of sleep supplements or medication. We'll talk about supplements in a minute because there are some excellent ones. So in the evening, I tend to eat pastas and rice and soups, and I still eat some protein, but from clean animal sources because that's what works for me. But I generally am shifting my whole system towards more quiescence. I might do a little bit of work in the evening. We are not big screen people in the evening. I do read books. Generally, we end up hanging out, just talking and listening to music and things like that. I might do some writing on the computer, but I'm not a big screen time guy. And I should say I love movies. It just so happens that I ended up with somebody who doesn't have much interest in movies, but is a really terrific musician. So sometimes she'll play music and I'll read or work, and that's kind of my evening most days. Sometimes dinner with friends, or if it will happen, of course.
The thing about cell phones is when you first get on there and you have, let's say no Wi-Fi on the flight or something, and you land, it can actually be quite stimulating. You get a lot of dopamine. Oh, there's this. Oh, there's that. But very quickly, when you're scrolling on social media, you're no longer getting the novelty, but you're continuing to do it and you almost don't know why you're doing it. At that point, it shifts over to something that's a bit more like an obsessive compulsive behavior, where we can define an obsessive compulsive behavior where the obsession leads to a compulsion. So the obsession is a thought, the compulsion is a behavior, but the acting out of the compulsion merely serves to increase the obsession. Right? This is very different than being obsessed with food or obsessed with cleanliness.
There's no payoff.
Right, exactly. There's no anxiety relief by carrying out the compulsion. With OCD behaviors, like scrolling social media, the dopamine quickly wanes, and then you find that you're just and we've all been there, you're scrolling, and like, why am I doing this? This isn't that interesting. This isn't that interesting. Now, the algorithms for social media are very clever, and I don't want to demonize it. I provide a lot of my life is spent on, on social media now, but in the algorithms that they've incorporated function on the most powerful way to keep people doing a behavior, or an animal for that matter, is intermittent random reward, or random intermittent reward, that you don't know when you're going to hit the jackpot. So you're scrolling, and then you see something. Typically it's very high, what
in nerd speak, we'd say signal to noise. So if you're reading some interesting things, this came out in the news, this came out, and then it's all of a sudden a riot, or a person that is base jumping off a building, or for people that are scrolling, looking at bodies or something like that, live bodies. Hopefully people aren't looking at dead bodies. But look, if something's very tragic, then that has this gravitational pull. And then what happens is you start getting the system working for that next dopamine hit that you don't know when it's going to come. It's just like gambling.